the beauty of just seeing our own brokenness, not boasting in our strength, but in our weakness, allows us to lead from a humble place, and therefore really want to call out the beauty and the gifts in the people that we work and serve alongside.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Framework Leadership, where we talk with leaders from across the globe and explore their leadership techniques, strategies for guiding their organizations to have massive success. I'm your host, Ken Engel, president of Southeastern University.
And I'm your co-host, Michael Steiner, senior vice president for advancement and innovation.
And that's a long title.
I know. It's he's still getting a lot to get used to.
A lot to do.
I have to pace myself through that one.
Exactly. I'm excited. We're excited today to introduce our guest for the show. She's no stranger to Southeastern University, been on our campus many times. Rebekah Lyons. Rebekah, great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you're advancing and innovating at every turn.
Well, thank you.
I am too. I'm very excited to see how we'll do that.
It's always changing.
Right. I know. Maybe we should turn the mic around and ask you some questions.
Sure. If you don't know, Rebekah is a national speaker, best-selling author, host of Rhythms for Life podcast. Rebekah and her husband, Gabe, have 4 children, and they live in Franklin, Tennessee. Again, just grateful for this conversation. And so as we start out, I want to talk about healthy relationships. As leaders, our job is built always around relationships, especially in the workplace, building a team, sustaining camaraderie, recognizing skills embedded in people, and pulling those skills out in an even greater way. The saying really is true. It's not about what you know, but it's about who you know and how you develop those kinds of relationships. This may cause, I think, sometimes issues, though, when we start seeing people as more than connections, and rather as trophies or building projects. So tell me, how can leaders avoid viewing people as just stepping stones or projects to be fixed? How can they truly see and honor, their God-given value as individuals, their contribution to, bringing the solutions to things that our world needs?
Well, I think it's hard to not see someone else as a transaction if you even value your own identity as like you're only worthy as your latest accomplishment. I think we treat people, we give what we've received, right? So we minister and love and serve and lead to the measure that we've actually found that freedom and that identity in Christ and that belovedness as sons and daughters of God. And so I think sometimes we climb a corporate ladder because we believe our worth is attached to that. So therefore we would see those who we partner with or leverage that their worth is also attached to that.
Right.
And so I think the freer we get in our identity as being first loved by God, just inherently as human beings with finitude, right? Like we're finite creatures that have limits, and we get really comfortable with that. And that's why we become dependent on God, and we trust His Spirit to live and move and have our being and open doors and bring people around. But we understand that our worth is in our belovedness, not in what we accomplish for God. Yeah. And so as we come into that maturity, I think in our Christian journey and in our vocational pursuits, then all of a sudden we're able to love people the same way. We're able to kind of see them and call out the gifts in them and speak life over them. And then we start to lead from a framework, what I would call reciprocity. And I think the healthiest relationships go 2 ways, where we're not like, you're the subject or the target or the project, and I'm the one who's fixing you. But instead, we are mutual sons and daughters of God who are walking this out. I often say with my audience, like, we're running alongside. I've not arrived, but like we are all in process becoming more like Christ in the way we love and serve Him and other people. Yeah. And so it's like we're running alongside, and I might be a big sister, but I'm not without error. I'm very aware of my shortcomings, that the propensities to kind of fall back into old patterns or narratives, and the beauty of just seeing our own brokenness, not boasting in our strength, but in our weakness, allows us to lead from a humble place, and therefore really want to call out the beauty and the gifts in the people that we work and serve alongside. So that's my form of leadership.
Yeah.
I think Christ modeled that in servant leadership. I think true leadership lifts up the people around them, speaks life over them, and doesn't just care about like, what are you doing for this thing, but more about like, how are you and God doing? Where do you see a move? What's growth look like for you over the last year? What are you convicted by? What have you been humbled by? How can I know a little bit more about your personal life or your family? Because again, when the work fades, our identity in Christ is still secure.
My wife and I were just talking about this kind of phenomenon of making friends in our life, because now we've got little kids, and it's so fascinating to watch them in a room together. My daughters will end up in a room with other girls, and they'll meet, and all of a sudden they'll be playing. They've got a relationship. They're having friends. We go home, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's my friend. I love my friend." And I'm like, "Oh, what's their name?" And they go, "Oh, I didn't ask them their name. I totally missed that." But it's like so easy for them to create that connection together. My wife and I was like, why is it so hard? Why is it so easy for them to make a connection with a stranger to where they're calling them their friend without even knowing their name? But it's so hard for us at our age to have that kind of connection. What do you think's going on there?
Yeah. Well, they're probably not asking their friend, like, what do you do for a living?
Right.
Right.
Like, what are you best known for? What have you built lately?
Right.
Because those are all transactional questions. And I don't think we mean to lead in that way of like, okay, how does my life compare to yours? Or what the world might call external success. And it's always hard. You get a group of adults in one room and everyone's got to go around and introduce yourself. And you're like, I don't know what to say, because you either want to be super humble and not say anything. But then sometimes people are like, I'm still really confused about like what you get excited about what does God put in you that kind of makes your heart burn, So I kind of love to lead from just like, what are the passions that God's given you and why are they there? Tell me a little bit more about your story. I think that's a good way to, and I would say that's probably the adult version of a play date, right? Like you go to coffee with a friend that just moved to town and you're like, what brought you here? And like, tell me more about your family, or what drives you or motivates you in the work that you write about or teach about, or the school that you lead. What got you started? I always love asking backstories because there's always a story behind the story. And I think that's a real beautiful, pure way to get to know someone from a heart level before it's this external, expression.
Yeah. And I've found that by doing those kinds of things, you begin to build a culture of trust, a culture of transparency with those you get to serve, with those that are in your sphere of care and responsibility. But also, in leadership, you have to make some tough decisions, and sometimes you have to make tough decisions together. And sometimes make calls that maybe those people you serve might not agree with, but for the health of where you need to go, you have to make them. So how do you think you foster a culture of trust and transparency when those kinds of things happen? That you have to make these tough decisions, but yet I'm going to I'm going to trust in you that you are doing the right thing because I've known that you've cared for me in the past. So how do you foster that?
I think being clear and kind as often as possible, constantly revisiting vision and re-talking about the why and not the how, or and as long as you stay true to the why, and then you're seeking God and you're keeping things simple and plain. I think sometimes we can really make everything feel very vague, and the team is like, what are you not saying? I think it's helpful to just go, okay, here's what I'm sensing and discerning. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, invite feedback for sure, because none of this is ever one-sided, but don't be afraid to lean in and go, okay, I've noticed there's some tension here, or what this this thing that we are working on together, it doesn't seem to be working. That's why like dashboard meetings or analytics are really important. It's not like my opinion versus yours, but it's like, here's what we're seeing.
Right.
It's a very journalistic, emotional, neutral approach to going, okay, here's what we're seeing. How could we brainstorm together? Like as much as you're inviting in ownership on both sides, again, there's mutual reciprocity of respect of like, what are you seeing? Here's what I'm seeing. What could we collaborate on ways to improve? Yep. And having all those conversations earlier than later, because if we both feel it internally or different people on the team are feeling that stress internally, but no one's talking about it in a way that's not either pointing fingers or dusting it under the rug, then there's not going to be a healthy resolve or repair. So I think as straightforward as we can be, and as kind as we can be, I think that's actually really honoring the other person.
And I think there's so many leaders, they end up in kind of tough spots with their team because they don't, when those tough moments come, they haven't done the pre-work, right? So they think everybody's in there. They think we're all on the same team and we're all moving. And then all of a sudden they find, wait a minute, there was a whole bunch of stuff I missed. What are some like pitfalls, red flags, things that leaders can be looking for, auditing with their team to make sure, hey, I've got the connections. We're good. We're jiving together. How can they know, man, we're good, or I need to bring some realignment there?
I think the more in tune we are with our own internal like feelings that might pop up or be triggered in the middle of a meeting or in a dynamic, if we sense tension, trust me, you're not the only one. And so it's more going, how do we address it in a way that's helpful, beneficial, and curious? I think so often we sense tension and we want to analyze from afar and point a finger and make a determination without actually engaging curiosity. And the more we ask questions, and so for me, again, I'm a vulnerable leader. I have to be careful sometimes how much I will wear because I'm like, I'm sensing God's sharing this and I'm also watching this and what are ways, but I will tend to kind of lead with my heart, but the head is very close behind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what that does do is say, I sense this. Am I off? And if I am, would you show me more and tell me what's going on? Even not just in teams, I would say adult children and a lot of peers. It's going, am I reading this right? And if I'm not, help me understand what's your perspective? Because again, if you just open the door for conversation, it's amazing the traction you can make. Yeah. But assuming and keeping a distance only brings more hurt and misunderstanding.
Right. And it takes so much courage to do that. And I think that's the big word, right? Is to step into that spot, to not assume, is to have the courage to be wrong. And that's where I think, that's one of the things that leaders can really embrace, right? You don't lose by being wrong in that moment.
Yeah. Or you just say, I'm curious. I notice I'm sensing something, but I would love to hear from you what's going on or what's your perspective here. Because you're not losing any change by asking a question and then being quiet and listening.
Yeah.
You're only building trust in that moment. And then you're forging connection. And you might still land at a very different place, but that relationship could still stay intact. It might not look like the same working relationship. There might be blessing on both sides. It might be just like the time for a shift, but you could actually have still stay in relationship in some way that's very honoring. And I think that's important as leaders that we do, even when we do have to walk through transition, that we do that well with integrity, both to the person and to ourselves and to God, and just humble ourselves in the way we handle those things.
I want to talk a little bit about confidence in calling. I know you have a lot of experience and talk a lot when you speak and your writings on rhythms for health, emotional health, and mental health. And a lot of that plays into good confidence in who we are and what we're doing and how to pace that design, if you will. And a lot of leaders, can face this anxiety and burnout, even when they're doing something they're passionate about, and they really love, which is kind of ironic in many ways. But we're always told, follow your passion, find your calling, discover, in our language here, divine design, and then doubt can creep in. Why do so many leaders, do you think, struggle with self-doubt despite their accomplishments? How can we shift those mindsets? And how can moments of self-doubt be used as opportunities for actually mental health and emotional health and growth and stability in who we are?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, we go back to a moment where we really felt that invitation, whether it was, came through, suffering or heartache or desperation, but somewhere along the way, I think that our passion in our calling, like the root word of passion, means to suffer. So at some point, there was a time where we were walking through some form of a dark night of the soul or a desperate place. And that's where God intervenes and usually kind of resurrects something. And then all of a sudden you are given a story you can't shut up about. And what's so beautiful is you don't have to muster up the energy to have that passion. It comes from a very deep place. And so therefore, I think once you've got some, like for me, mine was panic disorder 15 years ago. God pulled me out of a pit of like a deep darkness of depression and anxiety, and then kind of put me in Psalm 18 in a wide open place. And with my God, I can attack a barrier and leap a wall. And so from that moment on, I'm like, we're doing this. But the beauty of that is he says, walk in step with my spirit. He doesn't say run ahead of my spirit or don't lag behind, but walk. And it's not run or like do a marathon. It's just like walk. And what I'm learning now, 15 years later, I just turned 50, is that I always want to engage calling with the long view in mind. Like Eugene Peterson's talks about, like, obedience in this long direction, wide obedience in this long direction of how do we live a life of faithfulness to honoring Sabbath, honoring rest, sabbaticals. Like if God created the heavens and the earth and rested, like who are we to think that we need to achieve more in less time than what he modeled for us? And that, I think, rest precedes blessing, like from the way he created and then rested and then blessed that day. And this beauty of going, we don't run to earn rest, we run fueled from rest. And so when that becomes your posture, you don't have to strive ahead. What God can do in a day could be more exponential than something that you like army crawled for a decade. And when he blows his wind and favor on things that you did not see coming, he can literally turn things around because you waited on him. And so there are times in my calling, even now, where I will say, Gabe and I are like, we want this fall to be a season of slowing. Well, slowing might look for some people different than others, but you might go from 90 RPMs to 80, right? But slowing needs to still be intentional, and rest requires pursuit. Like he says, come into my rest. It's not like trip over it and then burn out. But if you actually pursued rest as a place of replenishment versus burnout, then you'll come back out of that season more revived in your spirit and more energized in your soul and more on fire with the calling that's there. So just trust the rhythmic cadence of, the seasons, spring, summer, fall. Winter is the same in our lifetimes. There are times where we're quiet in a public way because there's so much happening underground that is rooting and fortifying our faith, that will maybe have a public expression at some point, but that's really, it's irregardless of that. It's like, what is God doing? Is God doing a new thing in me so that at some point that might show up publicly? But I've got to tune in, dial into that vine so that fruit bearing season will come in a way that nourishes other people.
I want to go back to your story. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but you've talked about openly about some of the struggles you've had, especially with panic and anxiety disorder, and maybe kind of walk us through a little bit. What were some of the signs that were happening on the front side that maybe if you could go back and say, if I had paid more attention to that, I could have saved myself some heartache there?
I'm not sure that I would have saved Heartache because this was catalyzed by a move from the suburbs of Atlanta to downtown Manhattan. And so we sold 75% of what we owned. We very much induced this.
Okay, got
it. No, I say that in the fact that the Lord called us to New York City, and I kicked and screamed for about 3 years, but finally, because of the work we do in our nonprofit space with Think Media and equipping Christians on the front lines of culture and arts, media, government, policy, education, we realized a lot of those Christ followers felt very much alone, and they would intersect often in industry in New York City. And so we were part of church planning up there as lay people on the Upper East Side and downtown and Tribeca and Chelsea, and we just wanted to be a part of the church there, knowing that like we were even serving people on Sundays that were on those front lines of finance and fashion and all these places, trying to find, again, as Christ followers, their divine design in those lanes and finding that redemptive edge, right? Trying to be and feeling very much alone. So because we chose to do that, I just think we just didn't really know what we were doing because my anxiety or my panic was rooted in claustrophobia, and it was truly triggered by 8 million people in the span of 11 miles. And it was planes, trains, elevators, subways, and crowds. So that was just my story. And what I know now is that anything we do that becomes a phobia or something that's like overwhelming, there usually is a backstory. And I write about that more in some of the books, but it just was an onset within 4 months of moving there and just the reality hitting and the powerlessness attached to that. But I also know that God used, while it was a pressure cooker to bring some things to the surface, God also used New York City to actually be a revival of my soul because I was so desperate for his move and his rescue. And the Holy Spirit got so loud. And sometimes you have to leave like Christian subcultures to kind of just be plopped in the middle of obscurity, and God is like your ever-present help. And so that's really what my ministry grew out of that season. And now I just believe so much in the rescue of God in the darkest places. And I don't think I pray that I would never grow tired or, casual about that.
Love that so much. And yeah, it's always amazing to see how God uses experiences, both good and bad, things that we go through to transform us from the inside out. There's no doubt about that. And I've always believed a key to that transformation through all those experiences is recognizing your limitation. It's truly God that brings about that transformation and change. It's not by what you do or how you do it. Those kinds of things are important. But and that leads me to a final question I want to ask you in our conversation. As Christian leaders, we're called to be humble in our leadership. But sometimes that humility can begin to turn into pride over time. Look at what's been accomplished, or look how I've been used, and it just starts getting in the way. Again, not always recognizing it was God through me, but recognizing it's God. How can leaders strike that balance between humility and confidence without it turning into pride and arrogance?
I think as long as we see our vocational call as one of obedience and submission versus selfish ambition, right? Like he's saying, do nothing out of selfish ambition or empty conceit. And I don't think that the Lord is like condemning ambition, but if it's self-centered or to grow my thing, that is so temporary. Let's be honest. Any social platform is going to be fleeting. Any email platform, any book, anything that we are building, as in this kingdom of man is so temporary. So if we see it as a vapor, right? And all the things that are unseen are eternal, right? All the lives that will come to know the Lord, all the people who will turn towards God, the softening, then it helps us stop taking ourselves so seriously, right? Like, we're no longer a slave to sin. We're a slave to Christ, right? And so I think this obedience piece and the submission, because I tell God often, I said, if I make this about me, make me mute. Right? Like we don't have to, I'm not helping you. I'm like, we're helping no one. If I'm speaking as if like this came from me. And then the second thing would be, you just tell me when we're pivoting, like maybe we're done. Like you open and close the doors of what vocational life looks like. My answer will be yes, because I love you, whether it's like public expression or private confession. Like my answer is yes, because I love you. And this is just obedience. Yeah. And so Paul models this so well. Like I don't boast in my strength. I boast in my weakness, so that his glory may be on display. And if this is truly about God advancing it's like when David accomplished all the things God had for him, he fell asleep. Right. So I kind of feel like, oh God, you just, I mean, I would love to do this as long as you'd have me do it, but I didn't start this in the first place. You did. So you get to call the shots on, every decade. What does this look like? What do you want it to be? And I heard the Lord say a few years back when I was reading Andrew Murray, again, written in 1895, you write Abiding with Christ. And it was all about how the vine is the one that brings the nutrients of heaven to the branch. And I just kept hearing the Spirit whisper during that season of reading that book. He said, initiate nothing and watch what I can do. And it doesn't mean like sit on your hands. It just meant stop pushing doors open. Like you don't have to make things happen. You just need to, be low, be diligent, be faithful with what's right in front of you, and just let me be the one who is taking the reins on this.
Wow. Well said. Great encouragement. Rebekah, thank you again for joining us today on the Framework Leadership Podcast. Grateful for your insights, your experiences, and how you're encouraging all of us through your writings, your speaking. So thank you so much for that. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me. Love everything that you guys are doing, and just pray blessings over another year with your students.
Thank you. Thank you. If you want to stay up to date with Rebekah and learn more about how to cultivate a healthy life, you can follow her on Facebook and Instagram at Rebekah Lyons, or go to RebekahLyons.com. Check out all of her amazing resources. Hey, thanks for joining us today. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Framework Leadership. If you're watching on YouTube, now would be a great time to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, so you can get incredible leadership content right to your YouTube feed. You can also check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts every single week, Framework Leadership. And if you love great email newsletters, and I know I do, make sure you check out keningle.com and subscribe to the Framework Leadership newsletter. It's an incredible piece of content we put out every single week of amazing leadership resources right to your inbox. Make sure you check it out. You can also follow us on Instagram at Kent_Ingle, at Dr. Michael Steiner, on X at Kent Ingle, and on Facebook at Kent.Ingle. Stay up to date on all the incredible things happening on the podcast and at Southeastern University. We love you guys, and we love our followers and our subscribers. Thank you so much for listening to the Framework Leadership Podcast.